there until I was 11, and that's when my parents decided to move here. And today I'd like to focus on the issues facing women in both Iran and Afghanistan. That's what the paper that I'm a part of focuses on. And with a strict focus on the effects of imperialism, on the situation of these women and civilians within these countries. So, after the incidents of September 11th, the United States launched a so-called offensive called as the War on Terror. Their country's security, being at supposed risk, provided the United States and their NATO allies an opportunity to go into Afghanistan to get rid of terrorism, to make the situation for women better, and to instill democracy. Yet, 8 years pass, and we still seem to be at risk of terrorist threats. The situation of the women in Afghanistan is no better, and they were rewarded with an oppressive patriarchal system. The Afghan judiciary does not effectively deal with crime, and it often indicts the women who were abused and raped more severely and more often than it does the perpetrators. The only bit of so-called democracy in the country is the disputed, undemocratic elections that recently took place, and the elections only had one candidate, the current president, Hamid Karzai. He was put back into a parliament that was full of warlords, drug lords, and a lot of the members used to be part of the Islamist extremist group called the Northern Alliance. Now, the United States and the European countries often argue that the situation of women is now better because they can now participate in public life and that they're no longer slaves in their own homes. But the sad, unfortunate truth is that they still continue to be slaves, and they're victims of an unjust, misogynist elite who rule their country. The US-supported government of Karzai committed itself and promised before the elections that they will help better the situation of women. Yet, surprisingly, they passed a law that came to be known as marital rape law. And this law legalized rape within marriage, and it took away consent from women for their own marriage, divorce, and custody of their own children. Now, often we see in the media female parliamentarians within the Afghan parliament, and we're told, and Americans and Europeans so fondly speak of these parliamentarians and for the efforts that have been made to make the situation of women in Afghanistan better. But the truth is, these women MPs have a choice between silence or death threats if they do speak against the regime. So, what our media calls progress since the 2001 invasion is really lower life expectancy, lower literacy rate, very poor living conditions, where 90% of the population does not have proper sanitation. So, since the invasion, opium growth has increased, making Afghanistan the provider of 92% of the opium world trade in the world. And as notorious and as bad as the Taliban were, they almost wiped out opium growth in Afghanistan. So, how can we speak of the improvement of women's situation when the rate of school dropouts has increased and 80% of Afghan women are abused sexually, mentally, and physically? We cannot begin to speak about democracy and women's rights who are still being threatened and killed for participating in public life. Before the Afghan women can begin to work toward a democracy, their female population needs to have equality both within their laws and in practice. And before equality can come about, there must be peace security, and they need a legitimate government that is not attached to outside forces. So far, the United States and the NATO forces have failed in these regards, and civilians continue to be killed by NATO forces, and civilian homes continue to be bombed because they're mistaken for Al-Qaeda hideouts. The foreign troops have gone in with this mentality and conception that they're there to save these people from their own religiously extremist values. But let us not forget that it was these imperialist powers which funded religiously driven political activist groups such as the Mujahideen, the Northern Alliance, and even the Taliban for some time. The same groups they're fighting now. It was imperialism that brought the Soviet Union into Afghanistan during a time when their government was trying to improve the situation of their people, when they were imposing land reforms to help the farmers, and when they were helping build better rights and more equality within their society for the women. And it was also under the name of saving the world from the evils of communism that the United States intervened to weaken the USSR and funded extremist Islamic groups. So now, the same practice, what we call foreign intervention, peacekeeping, I would call it imperialism, installed the unpopular Karzai government, which helps the profit-earning and hegemonic goals of the West within the region. And the invasion of Afghanistan has provided the building of oil pipelines in the Middle East, and also contracts for foreign companies. So, from British to Russian to US invasions in Afghanistan, the imperialists have brought nothing but instability, poverty, and death for the Afghan nation. It will only be until the immediate removal of these foreign troops that the people will be able to rise and claim their home and therefore their own fate. Let us not forget that it was these same people, without outside help, who were able to drive out the British numerous times, as well as the Russian intruders. Now, let's look at Afghanistan's neighbor, Iran, who also has a long history of imperialist control and influence. A classic example of foreign intervention within Iranian politics is with the oil nationalization. Dr. Mossadegh became a very popular prime minister in Iran because he nationalized the oil reserves in the country. And obviously, this did not benefit the British. And they imposed an embargo against Iran. And they also plotted to bring down the democratically elected government of Iran and successfully remove Mossadegh in 1953. And since then, Iran was again under a monarchy, which was influenced by imperialist powers, until the revolution in 1979. Now, Iran was really important to the United States, as Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State and National Security Advisor to the Nixon administration, said, the loss of Iran was the greatest single blow to U.S. foreign policy since World War II. So, why would the United States support, or at least not overthrow, the anti-imperialist Islamic government of Khomeini when they had the chance to? I believe that the United States chose to support this extremist group when the Pahlavi monarchy started losing support because they were the only group who could justify notorious acts under the name of religion. So, supporting Khomeini was an achievement for the West and the United States because it prevented Iran from falling into the hands of communists during the Cold War. Now, Iran's current laws reflect Sharia law, which means that they're sexist and they're oppressive to women. The government undermines a woman's independence when it forbids the women from engaging in certain occupations, and by law requires that a woman gets the approval of her man for many of her decisions. So women in Iranian law are inferior to men.